Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive. We've got another interesting show for you today. A lot of things going on. Obviously, a lot in the Israel-Hamas war. We're going to be coming to you live later on this afternoon with an update on that. But today I wanted to update you on what's going on with the Ukraine-Russia war, because there's been a lot of events happening, more so off the battlefield than on the battlefield. And I guess in certain sense, you can say there's multiple battlefields. This one is in the battlefield of getting money for their operations and continuing to be able to fight. And that battle started last night, actually, in the U.S. Senate. Now, last night, there was supposed to be a private meeting of senators among themselves and with some administration officials to talk about asking questions about what the strategy was, what they were going to do, how much money they wanted to get to Ukraine, et cetera. But the whole meeting broke down into a series of arguments and complaints among various members. Most of it had to do with how the funding would be settled and would it be tied to some border security issues for the U.S. border. And that broke down into a lot of acrimony. We're going to see some comments on that in just a second. But then that had a cascading effect because Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, was then supposed to meet via VTC, video teleconference, with both members of the House and the Senate. Those were both canceled because I think that he could certainly see that if the U.S. members of Congress themselves couldn't even come to a decision about what to do, it would kind of be pointless for him to go in after the fact and then try to talk to him again. So that meeting was canceled, meaning there is still nothing on the table for Ukraine to get funding. And the funding that has already been allocated will run out at the end of this month. Now, that leads to the big question of what should the United States do? What is our objectives? What is our national interest in this? And importantly, what is the prospects of success? Now, we're going to start off by showing you a little clip that the Washington Post had out this morning, which really, in a concise way, highlights the internal division among members of Congress right now over this issue.
Day one of this administration, he put forward an immigration reform plan that has yet to be acted on. Congress basically ignored it. If they're serious about immigration reform, they ought to take that proposal up by the president. They ought to also pass our supplemental request.
I will not vote for any aid until we secure our own border. Reform asylum, reform parole is possible to do. Democrats don't want to do it. All Republicans want to do it. I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves.
It's going to take the administration coming to the table and recognizing that their policy needs to change. America overwhelmingly wants the southern border addressed. It represents a national security threat, as his own security advisors are telling him.
In my experience, a lot of Republicans support Ukraine behind the scenes and then aren't willing to vote for it in public.
They are holding aid for Israel and Ukraine hostage to changes to the asylum system that would destroy the asylum system, things that they could not get done through regular order. And I think we need to put our foot down and say, no, vote on the aid package without those border policy changes.
It is astounding to me that he hasn't articulated to this day, what does the end state look like? What does success look like? Is fully ejecting the Russians from Crimea a critical national interest of the United States? How long is it going to take? How much money is it going to cost? What's the strategy to get there?
Now, let me interpret a little bit of that for you and kind of give you the so what of all that. Border issues have been an issue for decades. I mean, it's really always kind of lingering in there. So there's nothing new about that, obviously. We've had, the border crisis, whatever it was raised in all 4 years of the Trump administration. It's constantly an issue here. The fact that has taken precedence over the Ukraine issue is what's news. And the reason for that is because the Ukraine issue is dwindling in importance to the American people and definitely to Congress. And so now they're getting back to what's important domestically. The second part of that is the most valid, I think, part of it is what is the strategy? If you're going to try to tell the American people, we need to continue to be given our own national security capacity, our tanks, planes, artillery pieces, artillery shells, our ammunition, rockets, all the things that we're supposed to use to ensure our own national security. If you're going to be given that and taxpayer money, you need to be able to articulate a very clear, concise, and compelling vision for why it's necessary. And as the congressman there pointed out at the end of that, so far there's been nothing but a couple of platitudes, which we're going to get to some of those in just a second. But on the point of what the strategy is, One of the Minister of Defense for Ukraine, actually on Fox News yesterday, tried to provide some of those answers.
When you see that map and how it hasn't changed from June 7th to December 4th, and you hear the commentary about it, how do you respond to that?
Well, I always ask to invite them to the battlefield. It's our land, we defend, and first we have a strategic objective. We want to get to the 1991 borders. We have military objectives for 2024. The defense planning has its own defensive operation. It has a counteroffensive operation. Their objective is not for Ukraine not to exist, for Ukrainian people not to exist. And we're defending it. So it's for the American national interest to fight with authoritarian regimes, not to give them any sign of weakness.
It's interesting you mentioned authoritarian regimes. The New York Post has a story out quoting the Kyiv mayor saying Zelensky is turning Ukraine into authoritarian state just like Russia, says Kyiv mayor in shocking interview. At some point, he says, we will no longer be any different from Russia, where everything depends on the whim of one man. Klitschko, the mayor said, there is currently only one independent institution, but enormous pressure is being exerted on it. Local self-government. People see who's effective and who's not, and there were and still are a lot of expectations. Zelensky is paying for mistakes he has made. That, again, is the Kyiv mayor. Your response to that?
One, Zelensky is a visionary person. Secondly, he's a brave. He stood and fought against all the invasion. So I think the mayor's comments is that beginning of the political season.
Political season, yeah.
A couple of things really important there to point out. The Minister of Defense is a politician at heart, and he answered there because Bret Baier asked him first very pointedly, showing that map, which you've seen on our show before. We've actually done the same thing. We've shown a map separated by a full year with no changes in it. And he asked him in that, and his answer was a non-answer. He said, we're fighting hard. We're brave. No one's questioning that, but that's not the question he asked. He said, there's been no progress. What can you tell us? And he gave no answer. Then at the end, he asked him, what about what Klitschko is saying? Now, Klitschko, if you're not aware, he's the mayor of Kyiv himself, and he has been one of the most staunch supporters of Zelensky from the beginning. But now then, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, many are turning against him. And this is just one of the latest ones here. And he was asking about that because when Klitschko says that Zelensky has been turning into a dictator in certain cases and an autocrat, what he's talking about is that most of the opposition political parties have been banned. Opposition media has been banned. Even some religious institutions that they don't like have been banned. Free speech in many cases has been banned. People can't go on Telegram without saying many questions and then have a risk of being in jail. Those are things that we normally ascribe to the autocrat Vladimir Putin. But now then those things are here. So people are starting to turn even on Zelensky. But that leads to the next part of Zelensky himself. Now, as we showed on our show yesterday, you saw Zelensky, when he had that big moment when he addressed the joint session of Congress and this thunderous applause and constantly being interrupted with people cheering and standing on ovation. Now then, in light of that map that Bret Baier just showed where there's been no change in a year, watch Zelensky now.
Всі розуміють, що це найвища ціна. І тому я вас дуже прошу берегти себе, берегти своїх близьких, побратимів, військових, офіцерів, солдатів, звичайних солдатів, які з вами поруч воюють щоденно, віддаючи своє життя заради України. Я бажаю вам перемоги, бути міцними, не втрачати ініціативу, захищати Харківщину, захищати Куп'янськ, захищати кожного.
You see, he's sitting there. This is not cheering them on to victory. This is not even when he appeared before his troops after they had taken the city of Kherson last year. This is like, hey, we're troubled. Your guys are dying all over the place. And as I'm going to point out here shortly, anywhere you want to look on that map that didn't change, there's casualties going on by the day. Sometimes in the hundreds they die, and they're not, the ground isn't changing. They're not succeeding anywhere. So now then Zelensky has to go to them and try to buck up their courage. But see, these guys see those comments by Klitschko. They see some of these comments by other politicians. They see what's not happening in the U.S. Senate, and they see what's not happening on the ground. Now, if only everyone saw those same things, we might be able to bring this to an end. But even the American Minister of Defense, Secretary Austin, also is unwilling to see reality. Here's what he's saying.
Ukraine matters profoundly to America, and it matters for 4 key reasons. First, Putin's war poses a stark and direct threat to security in Europe and beyond. Second, Putin's aggression is a clear challenge to our NATO allies. Third, the Kremlin's deliberate cruelty is an attack on our shared values of democracy and decency. And finally, Putin's war is a frontal assault on the international rules-based order.
So you see there that what Austin is basically like not even talking any reality. In fact, nearly everything you said there was just a bumper sticker. He's talking about there is a stark threat to European countries, ergo NATO. He said that it's a frontal assault on democracy. No, it's not. It's not. Look, let's just dispense with the nonsense. What this war is about was about NATO encroachment to up to the Russian border by bringing Ukraine in, or threatening to bring, actually declaring that NATO was going to bring Ukraine in to the alliance. Putin has been saying since 2008 that's a red line. We're not going to do it. He had shown in Georgia that he was willing to use limited force to prevent NATO from going into Georgia. He had warned starkly in almost a year before this war started. That's what it's about. It's not about territorial conquest, no matter what anybody wants to tell you. It's not about trying to recreate the Soviet Union, which used to be the popular thing to say. That's nonsense. Now you see Austin is trying to say other things to try to say why we need to do it, because those other things are clearly evident that it's not true. Even if you wanted to pretend it was true, Vladimir Putin conclusively has shown you he can't do those things. After now 22 months of full-out war, he still only has about 17% of Ukraine, and he's been unable to get more. Now, I think in time he's probably going to succeed because of some really bad tactics and strategy used both by the United States and in Ukraine in what they've done. We're going to discuss that separately in a deep dive here. But the fact is that even with those mistakes that we've made, still Putin hasn't been able to go any further with that. So the idea, the claim by the Austin and many others here that Putin will represent an existential threat to Ukraine on a conventional level is utter nonsense. So it's just not true. Now, that brings us back to where we started up here. Should the United States Congress give more money to Ukraine? Should the U.S. administration actually lay out a compelling vision and tell us what the strategic interest is? What's the end state? What are we trying to accomplish? Of course, the answer is the second one is yes, if there is one. But if there's not one, and if we can see on the battlefield they're not succeeding, there is no prospect for them to succeed. You see the United States, however this issue is eventually resolved in the Senate, and it will probably eventually get resolved. I doubt that they'll go to zero. I doubt that they won't have any kind of money. They'll probably give some, but it will be way less than what's asked for. What's not even on the table is the hundreds and probably thousands of additional armored vehicles that would be necessary to make good on that first clip we showed you with the defense minister of Ukraine. He says they have a plan for 2024. They're going to go back on the offensive, and they are going to continue to go back. Their objective, he said, I don't know if you caught that, was the 1991 borders. Well, that's just never going to happen. If Russia has shown that they're incapable of taking the whole of Ukraine, Ukraine has shown that the utter incapacity to take even back this 17%. They just can't do it. Now, what sense does it make to say, let's try again after Russia is now even more firmly entrenched? There's reports out just this morning in the Washington Post that actually Russia has been spending this time increasing their defensive positions, digging even more of them, making them more impenetrable, while they're also building an offensive capacity, which is why I say that there's a greater risk that Ukraine could lose more territory than that Russia would ever be driven out. Folks, the same thing is going on in many European capitals. They just don't have any more tanks to give. They don't have any more airplanes to give, to throw into Ukraine, because they're worried about their own supplies. They don't have anywhere near enough artillery shells to even possibly set up another offensive by Ukraine in 2024. It's just very, very unlikely. Whereas Russia's is going higher. Their national production capacity is now going into full-on production. They're recruiting more personnel. They're going to move up to almost 2 million active duty troops. So while Ukraine is dwindling, Russia is increasing. Every metric you want to look at shows that the war is going against Ukraine, and that the chances of them winning, the chances of what Austin said coming to pass are just, they're never going to happen. It is time, folks, for us to finally acknowledge the reality. Just recognize what's going on the ground and say, all right, what we wanted to do didn't work. Maybe there was a good reason for it. Maybe it was a good aspiration. I'll leave others to decide that. But whatever the case was, this is what is the truth now. They're never going to accomplish that. So it's time for America to say, let's do something that makes sense. I would love to see the Congress, and the Senate and the House both say, all right, whatever we're going to end up giving them, there will be strings to this. There are limitations. We're going to give you maybe some defensive arms, things that will try to help prevent Russia from gaining any more ground, but we're not going to give you another package of hundreds of armored vehicles, millions of shells. That's just not going to come. It is then incumbent upon Ukraine to make their own choice, to say, we're going to do what we can to preserve what we have and try to make a negotiated settlement on the best terms they can get. Now, I know that's anathema to many people. People don't want to hear that because there's so many people that think evil empire, and they don't even want to talk to them anymore. They just want them to lose. Again, you can have that desire, but if the physical constraints won't allow it, you can't pursue a policy, you can't succeed. Otherwise, in time, you may lose even more. And then actually Russia could pose more of a threat later on if we're unwilling to recognize reality now. So for our own interest, it's time to put aside all these bumper stickers like we keep hearing from senior officials, both in Kyiv and in Washington. It's time to recognize the truth, folks, and let's get this war shut down. Let's start protecting those innocent civilians in Kyiv. Let's start protecting those innocent soldiers in Ukraine that keep going to the front, even though they're fighting a losing cause. Don't say how proud you are of them and how brave they are. Let's keep them alive, because Ukraine is going to need those men on the other side of this war to rebuild their country. Let's don't throw any more of them away. That's all we have for you today. We're going to have an update for you, a live update later on this afternoon on the things going on the Israeli-Hamas war. And we're going to continue to being unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you all the truth, even when it's hard and ugly like this one was, but it's what you deserve to know. And we're going to be here for you. Be sure to like and subscribe, share this channel with everybody you know, because most people don't get the truth that you're getting right here. And I want to see that expand. Thanks. And we'll see you later on this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.